Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again from Film Fanatic headquarters. So, hope everyone's doing good. Thanks to the folks out there on the World Wide Web who show their support and love with this channel. Still cranking out the videos. I try to, like I've said before, I do one a day, and if there's some kind of lag of where there might be a delay of when a video appears, it's usually always due to I had some stuff come up or couldn't get to it. I've changed the way I do these videos quite a bit. Like I mean, again, I used to when I first started doing these videos back in when I was just doing the Facebook Live videos, I was doing them once a month, sometimes twice a month, and I was kind of like reluctant to do it because I never really felt comfortable. I never thought I would be that comfortable doing a kind of a video audio kind of a thing. And then eventually I did that for about 5 or 6 months, and I was doing just videos on my Facebook page for Film Fanatic, and I basically do like more or less what I'm doing here, but I do these live reviews where I talk about a movie. And then after about 5 or 6 months of that, I kind of kept it where I was just doing it once or twice a month. I wanted it to be, maybe a specialty event. I didn't want to like overstay my welcome kind of a thing. But I don't know. I started to learn more about it. I started to enjoy it more, obviously. Then I had the idea of bringing on some guests. I had some guests on the show, and that was a lot of fun. That's something I really love doing. And then around that time, I started writing reviews for Opera House Video, which is the local shop here in town in Belfast. And then I started doing video reviews for those reviews as well, and they were printed in print reviews in these little booklets. So that got me to start doing more videos, and then I was doing them a little bit more often. And I kind of was like, you know what? I think this is like an exercise, and the more I looked at it, I started to looking at it like a lot of things that are new that you want to explore or learn. There's always if you want to try to get pretty decent at something, or even if you want to try to get good at something, there's obviously a discipline involved. There's the process of acquiring a skill set, and the more you do it, the more you do something, the better you get at it. So I started doing videos more often, but then it was a problem. I was running into these problems around the technical issues around doing the Facebook Live videos. I wasn't really happy with the quality. And fast forward, I did that for about a year, and then this past summer, I had the idea of doing, maybe throwing my hat into the ring as far as doing YouTube videos. And I was really intimidated about doing that because I saw that it seemed like it was hard to get traction. But then I just started doing it, and since then I've been doing it every day, and it's kind of evolved to the point of where I don't know, to a degree it's made me fall in love with movies even more, and I've come to the realization how much films really mean to me and how inspirational they are. So I just started to understand that more, and now I'm at a point where I do a video every day. Case in point, like yesterday, I did a video, and I changed the way I do the videos. I do them in the morning now, usually, before I'm, kind of starting my day or whatnot. And I started, so yesterday I shot a video, and but I had, quite a few things going on in the morning, so I couldn't really get to uploading it. So I uploaded it this morning, and it's up now. So, and lately I've been covering movies, a lot of newer films that I've been seeing. It's been a while since I've seen any newer films, And there's been some great movies that have been coming out last year and also this year. So I've been focusing on newer things lately, and that's been a lot of fun. I'm always trying to mix things up a little bit here on this channel. I love, I truly believe variety is the spice of life. The more things you check out, the more it, you know, can further your interest, and you can pull from that many more resources as far as influences. I have that as a thing for me when it comes to writing music. I notice it. Movies are the biggest inspiration for me, so I notice the more things I check out. Like for instance, lately I've been writing. I've been on this little mini tear of writing new music, and it's been great. It's been a lot of fun. I started writing this new quantum tune the last few weeks, and then yesterday I started writing this other tune. So I've been pretty busy working on that stuff, and that's a super fun process. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of time, but I love doing it, and I don't know. It's just a really fun thing. But I attribute that to my influence in films, big time. It's really interesting. For instance, I watched this movie, and it was a newer movie. It wasn't very good. I wasn't really into it, but it's this movie called Babylon that was a new release, and it was part of the of this newer batch of films that I had just rented from Opera House Video. And it was this movie called Babylon, and it came out last year, 2022, with Brad Pitt, and it's basically about the decadent Hollywood time in the 1920s. And it's okay. I mean, it's not a very good movie. It's so over the top, but there's not really any characters that I really like in the film. I'm not really. It's all about excess, but there's no. I feel like there's no great characters. The writing's not very good. There's no core. There's no base for you as a viewer, or for me as a viewer to kind of get into the film. There's some things about it. Visually, it's pretty cool. It really reminds me a lot of a Baz Luhrmann film. Well, I'm not really a big fan of. I've never really been a big fan of musicals. I know there are great musicals out there, but I've never really been a fan of musicals. And Baz Luhrmann is a very famous director. I think visually he's a really great director, but I'm not really a fan of his films because I feel like all of his like theatrical background in theater work is used to kind of overcompensate for the lack of writing and the lack of characterization in a lot of his films. So I feel like he just uses that skill that he has to an overabundance of where it's like overwhelming and it's like overstimulating, where everything is just there's so many fireworks going off at the same time, and there's no I don't know, there's no ebb and flow, there's no downtime, and I find his films like really exhausting. Plus, I'm not really a big fan of musicals. Like he did, what probably his most famous movie is Moulin Rouge. Not a real big fan of that movie. And then he's done a few other films. I think the last one he did was the Elvis Presley movie, which is the same thing. And that movie was so critically acclaimed, and it fell completely short for me. I didn't make it all the way through because of those same things where it's all fireworks, but there's not really, the core of it isn't really about the story. There isn't really any base to what's going on, and so everything is focused on what I would presume to be kind of the exterior of a film, where visually it would look good, or there's going to be, maybe a high production value, which I'm a fan of, but at the same time, I feel like it has to start with a great script, great acting, great direction, and where you're empathetic to the characters that you're seeing and that you naturally care about them, and it's a story that pulls you in. And I feel like with the Elvis Presley movie, there isn't any of that. It's again the same kind of aesthetic that he follows in all of his films, of where well, I'm gonna utilize just my strength. I feel like Baz Luhrmann, although I think he's a good director to a degree. I think he's more or less a one trick pony. He does one thing very well, and I think he uses that to overcompensate. But anyway, that movie, I started to watch it. I actually really love Brad Pitt as an actor. I think he's a really great actor. I've been a fan of his forever, and so that was why I bought why I rented the movie. And again, couldn't really get into the movie, but there's certain scenes in the movie where the music is really cool, particularly like the kind of the main title sequence. And I thought it was really beautiful, really haunting, kind of melancholy, different tone shift than how the movie kind of is presented to you. And I really liked it a lot, that part. And I noticed I started yesterday when I went to go work on some music stuff. I had that theme in my head, or that melody, and I started to write this song that was totally inspired by that. So that's just kind of how my brain works all the time. It's interesting, but anyway, I'm keeping up with these shows. These next couple of shows are going to be about newer films, and in particular, a new movie I just rented called Missing, which came out in 2022, late last year. It might have actually come out early this year, but really great movie, really great suspense movie. Huge fan of really great suspense Latin films. And so before I do that film, I wanted to do the filmmakers who were responsible. They also put out a movie in 2018, so I figured it, and I really like that film a lot. And so I decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the film from 2018 and then do this newer film that they just put out. And so today's show is going to be about this movie that came out 2018 called Searching. And it's a mystery thriller. Really, really great film. And it was directed by Anish Chagnati. And it's a really interesting film because it's basically about this father's daughter who disappears. And the whole kind of aesthetic around the world of this film is all the information you're getting in regards to the parents trying to track down the disappearance of their daughter, all of the elements of mystery. And again, both of these films, and this film definitely has, it really reminds me of Alfred Hitchcock, but in a really, really contemporary light and a very modern, and with a real modern aesthetic. But the core of the story is like just classic Hitchcock, I feel. But yet it's its own thing. It's not like a ripoff per se, or even like say an exploitation version of that. But really great film, and the whole kind of world, all the way you're getting all of the information is through computers and the digital format. Everything is shot in camera through the lens of Google searches, Facebook, FaceTime, emails, Snapchats, you know, all of the technological things that we use now, whether they're on our phones or on our laptops or on our watches. The whole story is told through that perspective. Like everything is all the information you're getting is through very modern technology, and it's really interesting. And I thought I thought like 2 points around that where it's I love that it almost has a sci-fi element, I think, because it's so tech oriented, even though it's not overtly a science fiction movie, but it so captures this film, so just does an incredible job on capturing kind of how we interact with one another as people, and how we access information, how we communicate with our friends and family, through various forms of technology, and how it's fairly easy to access information and about various subjects or about people. And it also raises the idea that it is unfortunately easier for people to dive into people's privacy, personal things. But it's really fascinating, because I think it's such a true contemporary version of how people live through technology. Whether you're going to do a Google search on something, or do a research. Say you want to find out about the news, that something in the news that just recently happened, and it encapsulates all of the tech that we are consuming, and is really the main way of how people communicate. But at the core of it, it is such a great human story. And I think it's a real interesting, to a degree, juxtaposition of how you can have this really great old school thriller, murder mystery film, but put in this incredibly contemporary lens. And I just think it's so, uh, to a degree, like a monumental feat. And again, like I talked briefly about Babylon, the Brad Pitt movie, where I feel like that movie really suffers. This film, like at the core, I think it's so modern and yet really unconventional, and but at the core, the characters are just really fleshed out. I think the story and the sheer suspense of the story, of the father's search, and all of these interesting plot twists, and the level of suspense, which really just gets turned up more and more throughout the film, is pretty extraordinary. And I feel like that story on paper is so strong. And then the exterior is how we are getting that information through the film, with the use of technology, and how we use technology, right now, as a society. And I thought it was such a great balance, and but the filmmakers really focused on making sure that I feel like that the story, you know, was strong, even if, say, if it wasn't set in a modern time, it would be strong regardless. And if it was, say, just set in a room with like 5 or 10 different characters, it could still, um, it could still transmit as a really great story. And I think that this film is a really great example of that being really successful, of having, if you have that core thing, you can, core story, or a really great foundation, you can put the film in any, you could tell in any kind of possible way, in any kind of world, but because the story is so strong, and it would still be successful. And I thought that they just did an extraordinary job. I watched a review of these films from a YouTube guy that I really like, Chris Stuckman, who is one of the best YouTube guys. I really love his stuff. He focuses mostly on newer films, but I really find myself personally, about 100% of the time, I agree with a lot of his reviews, and you know, mostly watch older films, but I try to, try to stay up to speed on a lot of newer films that come out. I think there's still been some incredible films that are coming out. It's always a thing too, where there's always this real negative. I see again, and I attribute that to people on YouTube or just reviews. But there's there seems to be this purveying climate, the part of this in this climate that we're in, and it's this purveying attitude that I see a lot on social media, especially in YouTube, or people who are doing reviews on movies, and a lot of the times, most of the times, there a lot of people are constantly saying that nothing really good is being made anymore, and that the films are crap and all of this shit. And I understand that. I understand that argument, but I truly don't believe that. I think there are some incredible films that are being made, and and I don't feel like a lot of these filmmakers are getting the credit that they deserve. Um, I don't, and honestly, I don't, when I compare, like, say, films that, a lot of the times people regard, say, like, the 70s as being the best period, the golden decade of cinema, or like the 1940s or 50s. But especially you hear about, well, like the 70s, when films made in the 70s were the was like that was the greatest decade. And in my own world, and for my own taste, like, I typically watch, most of the films that I watch are, these low budget exploitation movies in the 70s and 80s. Like, that's my jam, and I watch those movies all the time. But again, I love lots of different things, and I try to check out new things. And for the most part, I do believe, like, that obviously the 70s, that was one of the most important decades in, cinematic history. But I also feel that, there's been so many great films that I've seen lately. I don't really think it's that different. I don't really think quality is any different. I don't know. At the end of the day, I don't, and I think about it a lot. I don't really think the climate's any different in a lot of ways. And when it comes to films, I think it's harder to a degree for certain films to get made. But again, that's always kind of happened. Um, you know, it's always been a struggle with with filmmakers who are, say, in the industry, and then people who are outside of the traditional industry or the Hollywood system. That's always been a thing. I mean, that's not any different. And I think if a film and if a film company or filmmakers really want to make a film, they will somehow, figure it out and get it made. It just, there's been films like that have been really, really successful, that are completely outside of the system in every way. One movie I keep hearing about, which I haven't seen, is Skinamark, which is this horror movie that is incredibly low budget, but it's had this big success, and it's completely outside of the system. The other films, Terrifier, Terrifier 2, which I'm not a huge fan of, but again, I think it's really commendable. But those are films that are completely outside of the Hollywood system, and they've gone on to make lots of money. And then you have films like, I did a review on John Wick Chapter 4, which I think is one of the greatest action movies ever made, and I think it's definitely the best in that series. So you have that full spectrum, and that's going to always be a thing. I think it's always going to be a little bit of a struggle. I think there's the one thing I do see that is really different now is the way people see movies, and the longevity of films in the theaters, and the lack of certain films that even reach the theaters, and that it seems to be a thing that we're really iconic directors, to a degree, have a harder time making films. Case in point, where you have Martin Scorsese, for instance, or David Fincher, two, incredible, two of some of the greatest directors ever, really important directors. From what I've gathered, they're now they've made films where they've worked with Netflix, and with The Irishman, for instance, Martin Scorsese's last film, which is an extraordinary movie, he could not get that funded in Hollywood, which I just found mind blowing. It's an epic film, and it's a huge scale film, and that's, I guess, why that he could not get that film financed. But he ended up striking this really good deal with Netflix, and they created the film. But Martin Scorsese is a brand, one of the biggest names, one of the most respected names, one of the most iconic directors ever. And he could not make a film in Hollywood. He could not get his film financed. So he essentially acted as almost an independent film director. I mean, which is wild, you know. And he has another film coming out with Leonardo DiCaprio, which I can't remember the name, that I believe was put out by a major Hollywood company. But so that's really extraordinary. And then also David Fincher, where he now has been working in television, and his last film, Mank, which I haven't seen, was also a Netflix original. And he hasn't actually put out a full-on theatrical release in many years. That's one thing that I'm not really happy with, and also how the process is of how, you know, where films actually get to the theater or they don't, and then when companies like Netflix or Disney Plus decide to do productions for, and they work with these directors, which I think is great, and they finance these pieces of these films, but then there's no way of really accessing the films unless you are a subscriber to that channel, and they don't get a theatrical release where films are meant to be seen in the theater. So it's a weird time. Like, those things are the things that really concern me as far as moving ahead. And again, that's all attributed to people's personal habits, but then technology, and there's no slowing that down. It's a way of just having to adjust to what's going on, and the terrain that's always the ground underneath the feet of the filmmakers and the public is always changing. So, but again, getting back to this film, a really great film. Searching came out in 2018, and I think is in some ways, one of the most innovative films I've seen in a while. And really great cast. Again, something that is really just a highly original film, and really, really engaging. I mean, the suspense for this film is pretty much through the roof. And I look at it to a degree as like a modern day Hitchcock. Great cast. John Cho, Sarah Sohn, Connor Macbeth, Alex Jango. Really great film. And this second film that I'm going to do tomorrow, Missing, is looked at as a sequel. It's kind of the same kind of scenario, but a little bit more, I guess, ambitious to a degree. But Anish Chagnati is the director of both of these films, from what I've gathered, and what I was saying before when I was talking about Chris Stuckman, he's reviewed both of these films, and he really loved these films, and he was saying, well, like on face value, you would think that, or maybe these movies are being made, with the technology in mind, that maybe it's kind of trendy, or it's trying to be a marketing thing, but there's not really any depth. But he said, because these films are the technology is such a part of it, of how we interact. Like, maybe it's just like this trendy kind of thing, or gimmicky. But at the core of these films, and this film in particular, it's the writing is so great, and the suspense level is so high. And from what I gathered, because of the technical complications that is used to make these films, I believe Searching took 5 years to make. They shot it in a few months, but because of the the requirements of how they put together this film, it was really complicated. But Yeah, really great. Anish Chaganty, really interesting, really innovative director. And if you're a fan, and I'm a huge fan of Alfred Hitchcock and suspense movies, murder mystery films in general, these are really great films. Searching, this film here came out in 2018. He also made a film or film project Run 2020, which I haven't seen. Really, really great. And Missing, which I'm going to do a show on tomorrow. Another killer movie, and I highly recommend seeing his films, particularly starting if you start with his first film, Missing. I'm looking forward to trying to buy these on Blu-ray. I'm sure it will be a really intense visual and auditory experience, but really cool. So this is Jason Dean. Thanks again for your support, and please check out this new movie and stay tuned for the sequel coming right at you tomorrow. Peace.